Hey, welcome back to another season of Project CMS. So, I've been spending a lot of time this month actually doing stuff on the car, but it's all been research. Haven't done really much to the car other than take it to a few places. In the last video, you saw me do some tests where I actually raised this front suspension to gain more travel and to test it out on some bumps, and it did make a significant improvement. Since then, I've been kind of looking into where I want to go with the car and what I want to do, and I've pretty much dedicated this year to being suspension renovations. I'm going to go another route, most likely. Some of the research I've been doing, I'm going to link below another YouTube video where this guy actually has Teins. It's on an MRS, and he had changed the piston out and made him into a digressive setup. And based on some of my research, I'm leaning towards something that's a bit more digressive. It's really going to depend what I can find and what I can afford. Suspension really is an expensive market once you start getting into higher end things. The thing, I mean, sure, it'd be nice to have some Ohlins or some Penske's, but I've been pricing these things out, and they're just, I could buy another car for that much money. I mean, we're starting at probably $4,500 for some custom entry level Ohlins, and they go up easily 10 grand. Same thing with the Penske's. Though I have been looking on eBay for used NASCAR parts. You might hear NASCAR and think something else, but there's actually quite a good shock, and you can have them revalved and done something that suits it. I haven't done a video yet just because I've been sick and I've had my voice, and I've gotten most of it back, so bear with me. I'm also shooting on another device to test it out and see how it does with this. But the plan is, most likely, the Teins are about to come off, and someone else is going to get to enjoy them. But I'm going to take it another level and probably get something made to suit exactly what I'm looking for. I'm still doing research. I'm going to show you guys a little bit what I've been looking at, some of the research I've done. Like, I've gone to some chassis engineers in town. There's one out in Troy. He's got a pretty cool shop, and I looked at some of the projects he was doing, and there's some other ones in St. Louis. But the most affordable option I found was probably about $800 to relocate the strut tower tops. And everyone else starts at double that, just from what I've researched. And that's just, when I start looking at spending that much more money, it makes more sense, I think, for me to leave the chassis alone, at the most maybe reinforce the area, maybe a 4mm plate or something like that. The TTE guys, I've been talking to them too. I've been talking to Weaver very little. He's the one that sells the old TTE stock, and I got a hold of another guy. I'll link his shop down below, and he had some information as well, and he actually makes parts for these cars. But I was able to find out caster and camber settings for the TTE cars, at least in the front. And I think it was something around 6 degrees caster in the front and 2-point-some odd degrees of camber. And it's all fixed. I was looking at the top plates. The top plates are actually mounted on top, and they reinforce it with a 4mm plate so it doesn't tear through the strut tower. And that adds a little bit of travel. It also has built-in caster. I'm assuming that's what the camera's built in as well. And then the lower arm moves the wheel forward. And I'm actually, something I'm going to have done is modify or make new lower arms, because due to my tire size and the caster, I'm a little bit further back than I want to be, and I want to keep the wheel center so I don't have any rub. But the cost of the TTE stuff, each arm is about €1,800. So we're looking at probably $5 grand for all the parts, and they won't fit. Supposedly they won't fit on a street car, that you have to have different pickup points or whatever. So just looking at price alone, I'm probably not going to mess with that. But I'm going to show you guys on the computer a few things I've been considering, a little bit of my research and what I found, and really just sort of what I'm looking at for planning for the future. So let's go inside and we'll check some of this stuff out.
All right, so here we are. I'm going to show you a couple of the ideas that I had been working on. So if I was to keep the Teins, I want to go lower and I want to retain travel. So the idea I'd come up with was mounting the camber plate on top of the strut tower. And based off a little bit of research, I was going to use a backing plate that would go underneath the tower, a spacer. I've seen kits that use a single metal spacer on each stud. I kind of like the idea of an entire piece that would sort of maybe help distribute some of that sideward energy or force. And then, of course, the top plate on top. If I was to have done this, I would have gone even further and probably put a sandwich plate on top of that, because it relies on these bolt holes for doing the caster adjustment, and I just thought that would help compress things and keep them from moving. Ultimately, I don't think I want to go this route. So raising the strut towers, I don't want to do because of the cost versus buying a new setup. This option is more approachable. Honestly, I don't know if the T3 top hats are strong enough to be mounted on the top. They were designed to be underneath. So I'm not a material engineer. I don't believe I'm qualified to answer that question. And I sent them an email and I hadn't heard back. If they respond, hopefully they'll tell me if they are. But I have a feeling that this kit specifically needs to go underneath the strut tower. So a couple other things. Here's an example. This is a very fast 205, and to gain travel, he actually cut holes in the hood and he raised his towers quite a bit so he can get the car lower. And this is a ground control kit. This is made for the FRS. This switches to above the strut tower mounting. Mustangs already have above strut tower mounting. Just an example of another car. This is a kit that was made for the 7th Gen Celica from Hotchkiss, and I looked at the design. There's a 7th Gen forum post where the guy does the install, and you can see how they designed it, and I kind of got some inspiration from them as far as how I might approach things, but theirs might be a little bit more complicated. I think for the sake of style more than functionality. This is a 205 TTE top plate with adjustable camber. Just to give you an idea, so they actually did the top mount, and I spoke to Lewis Racing on Facebook through the 5th Gen group, and they had mentioned that there needs to be a reinforcement plate put underneath this strut tower. So they said something about 4 millimeters. And here is the 185 top hat, and you can see it's a far more complicated unit. It looks like this might be an external reservoir coming out of the strut. And just another note, I'd found through talking that the caster of the TT tarmac setup was 6.5 or 6.15, and the camber was negative 2.45. So just a nice little note. The next thing I was going to show. So another thing I have to do, I have to move caster not just by the top but also by the bottom because I run such a large tire size. I want to get away from any rub. I want to center the wheel. So I've got two options. There's the expensive option of building a custom adjustable A-arm. I don't know why these are so expensive, but they are very expensive. To have someone build one, it looks like the minimum I'm looking at is $600 for one off. It's just an expensive unit. I've looked at adapting other ones from other cars. Still going to need some work. Still going to be costly. So I don't know if I want to approach that. I talked to I have another welder here that used to build, actually still builds dirt track cars, and I took some stuff to him and I showed him what I'm needing to do, and what he had suggested as a budget solution that he could do and still make it strong is actually cut part of the factory arm off, move it to the dimensions I want, and then weld the supports and make it one piece. The only problem with that is it's not adjustable, so I have to make sure that I'm absolutely right on my dimensions when it's done. But from a cost standpoint, it may be my best option right now. Next thing. So doing all this research, I've learned quite a bit. And if you just want something that handles better than stock, lowers your car, somewhat well built, there's a lot of off-the-shelf options. I'm trying to get something that's a little bit more specific for my needs and how I like to drive and how I want the car to feel. So I'm probably not going to take any off-the-shelf setup. But I know enough to be dangerous. I don't feel that I'm an expert yet. And what I'll show you in a minute will kind of help me realize that I need to seek guidance from some of these builders, but at the same time, learn enough to where I can make a wise decision. And one thing I was researching was spring frequency, because people, we were looking at the TTE spring rates, and that's supposedly 8 kg in the front and 7 kg in the rear, and that's really close. There's the Seika suspension builder. He claims that he thinks the front and rear should be about the same, so those kind of go hand in hand. What I did is I looked at the spring rates that Tein had designated, which was for the HA, which was 10 kg front, 7 kg rear, and the ratio would be, if I was to follow suit with 8 kg in the front like the TTE cars, 5.6 kg would be the same ratio as Tein. So I want to also look at the OEM ratio. So I took the OEM spring rates, and if I was to use their ratio, I actually would end up with 8 kg in the front and 7.4 kg in the rear, which is much closer to what TT says and what Seika says for their setups. And I just got a few notes here, and I'll post all this stuff in the blog that I'll link at the bottom. And I'll link to a lot of this other stuff as well within it, so you guys can find it and read up on it and decide things on yourself. J-Speed, let's see. The Pit Road M, they offer 6 to 12 kg in the front, 4 to 10 kg in the rear. Tein HAs, they were 10 kg in the front, 7 kg in the rear. I know the SSs were lower, but I don't remember how much. A lot of the coilovers that I see on the market right now, and that includes, the BCs and the K Sports and all that, I see a lot of like 8 kg, 4 kg options. And then Seika, they say the same for front and rear as far as what they suggested. Now, to help me better pick my spring rates, because I was looking at those information, I also found out about what's called spring, or the wheel frequency. And I have the corner weights of my car, and I was able to input this data. I looked at a 205 had done it, and I'd taken some of my own weights. And if I was to run 8 kg in the front, this is all the specs I came up with, and the wheel frequency we've got right here, these bottom lines. Now, what I found through trial and error of entering numbers, the closest off-the-shelf spring rate I could get, because typically they go to the whole number, I could end up with 5 kJ in the rear, which also follows suit with the ratio of Tein somewhat, a little bit lower. But if I was to go through that, and I'm going to do a little bit more research on the subject because I don't know how important the frequency is. Supposedly, it sets the same kind of reaction to bumps, front and rear, so the disturbance won't be unequal. It helps keep the car more balanced and handle better off of rough surfaces. And another note, this is the weight of my car. This is quite a while ago. It's different now. I'm hoping it's quite a bit lighter. But this was with RC bodywork, the Tein coilovers, and the SART exhaust. And this was the corner weights. So total was 3282, which is lighter than what a lot of the 185s come back as. I hear a lot of people say closer to 34, but I may be missing some options that help save some weight. And then left front 1017, left right 629, rear left rear, right front, rear right. So hopefully you guys can understand me under my cold. But to move on, so that's all that. I'm going to take you guys over to the browser. Now, Martin is Martin Valent. I don't think I'm saying his name properly. He is pretty well known as Gtfour77 in the Ultra community. Is one of the guy who built the autocross car that just did great. And he now has TM Racing, and he does MR2s now. But you guys go check out his Facebook, TM Racing. He builds shock bodies or housings for Coney race shocks, and this is something I'd kicked around the idea of, but I spoke to Coney some, and out of all the places I spoke to, Coney wasn't as helpful as a lot of them. They expect me to essentially know everything I want to know, and then I ask them what it's capable of, and they'll answer it. So I'm not educated enough to, I think, get this product and make it work for me. It's also going to be quite expensive. I mean, just for the inserts alone, it could probably run up closer to $2,000, and then you got to pay for the housings and the springs and all that. So it all adds up, and then none of this is cheap, but I don't know. I don't think this is going to really suit my needs. But what I want to show you, these are the dynos for that Coney race shock. Just to give you an idea, this is the 257, which is shorter, which is the one Martin uses. And this would probably be a great option for anyone who wants to strictly race their car. I don't know how it's going to do on the street. Coney says they know people that drive these on the street, but they didn't give me any definite answer of anything. So if this is something that interests you, do a little bit more research. But if you're wanting to do it and get housings, Martin's the guy. And this is their page on their 8611 race shock, and they have specs and everything, and you can do a little bit more research on them. But on the same note, I talked to Martin about maybe making housings for other types of struts, and what I had found in my research is that Bilstein actually makes the B6 for the 185. And this is a pretty good strut. I don't know how it's dampened. It's probably not really well set up for racing or anything for the 185 because it's probably based off of stock springs and stock weight and all that. But it's pretty cheap to get them revalved, and I think it's a great option. The only downfall is I don't think you could get a lot of height drop. So that's what kind of ruled those out for me, because they seem like a really good option if I just wanted to maybe go down an inch or so. And you'd have to do the same route as what people do with Coneys, is where you'd modify the rear housing and then have the another set of front inserts revalved for the rear and drop them in. But there's this guy I found, and just based off a little bit of reading, he seems like he knows what he's talking about. He may not, but it seems like it's worth reading up on a little what he says, because I'd consider this idea. The Z28 Racer guy, he did something I considered, but I wasn't sure it was possible, because when I called Bilstein, they were telling me that these are a single unit, that I cannot buy the inserts for the Evo 9 MR shocks. But what this guy did is he actually showed that you can disassemble them, and then he turned them and set up the housing and all that, and he made his own coilover. So, I mean, it's a really nice setup, a really good way to build something high-end for your car on a low budget. But the MR shocks are still somewhat expensive. I've seen them as low as maybe $300, $400 for a pair. And you need 4 fronts, because the rear setup is completely different, and you'd have to have the fronts revalved. But I think it'd be a good option for someone to build a race setup. But also about those, I've read a lot of the Evo forums when I was considering this, and they're just not designed for going that low. I mean, they lower them about an inch or so. There's another shock, the B8, which is actually designed for lowering. It has less material, or I don't know if I'm explaining it right. It's changed on the inside to where it could be lower. So it's something to look into. It's another full custom option, and it's a lot of work, but it's not adjustable, and I don't know exactly if it would work out for someone. So it's just something else to look at. And we're going to go here. Now, if I was to, I had actually called, or I'd contacted Weaver, because they already make parts that do what I thought I want to do. This is the TTE top hat for the 185. Or I guess it could be 185, 205, and Corolla. And it's fixed, so it's not adjustable as far as I can tell. It uses a larger bearing, but I think you also have to do the reinforcement to run it. And the problem with all this stuff is it's expensive. I asked for a quote on the lower control arms, because I found a person in the US that uses them, and he says they add caster at the base, which is exactly what I wanted. But when Weaver quoted me for these, it was going to be about 1,800 euros just for these parts and the brackets. And the problem with that is well, I mean, it's expensive, but it won't even work with the street car. He says that it won't fit. You have to use the spindles and everything. And here's an example of the front knuckle that's completely different. So you can see here, it's got a different mounting system. and it's integrated. So it's just not a cost-effective solution for me. If I was racing to win and competitively, sure, but for street car with occasional track and autocross, I'm not going to do it. But you can see there might be some interesting things we could learn here from the way this is set up. But honestly, I'm not going to be able to go $5,000 into lower control arms. If I'm spending that kind of money, I'll go buy a set of Ohlins and whatnot. Now this is Lewis Rally Sport. And they actually make some really cool TT parts, and they're worth looking into as well. If I have money in my budget this year, my budget's very fixed, and a lot of what's going to determine what I can get in addition is going to be how much my next set of coilovers cost. But they make a swirl pot for the cooling system that I really like to get to help improve my system. Now, back to the Teins. If I was going to keep the Teins, I'm going to link to this guy as well. So everyone seems afraid to do anything to their Teins. Teins, the only one that services them. They're out in California. This guy, he races an MRS, and what he did is he took them apart and he put a digressive valve in it. So he changed the whole shock into something that he really wanted. And he races nationals for the SCCA. But what he did is he did a gold valve, which had to be machined down, and he had to machine it for the shaft as well. So this is what that looks like. You can see the holes. And these are all tuned through different means of putting shims and whatnot. And then he told me, I got to talk to him. There's a discussion on his video that I'll link to. He told me that QA1 makes a 35 millimeter piston, which is exactly what the Tein needs. So you might only have to machine here for the shaft, which would be a bit cheaper than the route he did. But as I researched this and I really considered it, what bothered me was I know enough from what I've read on sort of what I want. But if it was that easy, it sounded so simple. If it was that easy, then how come so many companies are doing it wrong or not doing it well enough? And why are the companies that are doing it right charging an arm and a leg? And there is a bit more black magic, I think, to doing this stuff. So rather than me breaking in there and spending probably a long time to get it figured out and then not even possibly ending up with the setup I want, I'm probably going to go have someone else build something for me. I think that's going to be the safest route, and it's going to get me on the road much quicker. So I've been looking at a few different companies. And one real helpful company, and this is the one I was most interested in, was Fortune Auto. You may have not heard of them. The name seems, not that appealing, but they're actually a really good company. There's a lot of really great reviews for them. They make a digressive setup. It all seems to be made really well. They've got a lot of great reviews. They're really helpful. They were actually willing to sell me the 205 setup with a different lower mount, because the 205 is the only thing they make it for. They used to make some other stuff, but if they discontinue it, they do not get parts. They don't sell them anymore. That's it. I can't order the MR2 lowers or anything. They discontinue it, it's dead. Or at least that's how they made it sound. But the way the 205s work is the rears are the same as ours. As far as I know, the rear, those should bolt up. But these sleeves here are bare, and you actually weld them to the super strut mount. So knowing that, what I had kicked around the idea, they gave me drawings for various coilovers, and what it turns out, all the stuff they make stuff for does not mount to the 185 spindle. Toyota has changed their bolt spacing. Even though they use the same size bolt for a lot of their cars, they changed the bolt spacing, and that kind of ended that. But as you can see in the drawing, these are the fronts. It's got this tube that goes down, and then you would weld it to the superstrut parts. So what I'd consider doing is buying these, because they do the valve they want. They provide shock dyno, Swift springs. It's a great setup, and I would take them to a machine shop, get this cut, and get them to weld on the brackets for the 185. And I took a lot of measurements, and I think that if I was to do that, at the lowest these can go and still retain travel, it would give me the 20 millimeter back that the Teins, I couldn't get out of the Teins because I couldn't go lower with them and retain the travel, which would be sufficient. But it's a risk. I got to make sure I find a place that could weld it right. I don't know if they would honor the warranty if I changed that part, because I know that the shocks themselves are warranted for 5 years, but I don't know if that would actually void that on me. Um, it's a risk, it's an option, but I don't know if this is a route I would go. So there's Fortune Auto, and there's a couple other companies. So BC, you've all heard of them. They're quite popular now, and I've read a lot of reviews. They're actually a pretty good strut. It seems that it's quite common for when you buy one that's already in the inventory, it's pre-built from the factory. They don't necessarily match, so it's best to get those shock dynos so you can find out the difference and you can turn your clicks accordingly. Well, based on what I read about them, I really wasn't interested in their BR series. Their RAM series seemed okay, but the ER seemed to be a huge step. It was a two-way adjustable. They built it custom. I'd get the shock dynos I want, but it was not available for our car. So I talked to them for a while, and they were real helpful. And pretty much what they told me is they could build me, because they didn't have a car to test fit on. So what they told me is what they could do is they could build a RAM, which they already make, and they could put a remote canister that would come off the back end of it, and they could make that work for me. So that all sounded great, but the downside was that was going to be $2,500 for that, and they said for $300 more though they could push me up to the ZR series, which is three-way adjustable. I could not find hardly anything on their ZR series. I don't think it's that popular, because once you start going that kind of money, I think there's more options like KW and whatnot, so people might not sway that direction. But what I was able to find, someone had posted in the forums, his name's Hick, HIC, and he has a shop out in, I think, Croatia, and he claimed that he was actually testing ER series for BC. Well, North America doesn't seem to know anything about it, even though they're listed for sale in Europe for the 205 and the 185. BC North America wasn't sure they existed, so they're researching this for me right now. If I was to go into a BC coilover, this is what I want, because they're two-way. You can adjust them enough to get a versatile ride for all the conditions you're looking for. They would be custom built, so I'd get them valve the way I wanted, the spring rates I wanted, and they would also be matched and whatnot. So I really think that this would be the ultimate option if I was to go BC. So it's not cheap to go to this model line. It's quite expensive, especially with the Swift springs, which I figure if I'm going to do, I might as well do at the same time, because I believe they have to valve them for the springs. But that's really a really good option. And there is one more option that I've been kicking around, because I've looked at the Olins and things like that, and I just don't think it's going to be affordable. But the Seika, the name sounds bad. I mean, honestly, it sounds like English for Celica, like it was spelled wrong or something. I don't know, but they've got great reviews. They're famous for their brake kits, their coilovers. I ran across this picture, and I'm like, oh, these actually look pretty well made, and it turns out they are their coilover, because I couldn't find any reviews for our car as far as their stuff. But what they do is they fully custom build. And this member here on the boards, 182 ER, he has a set, and he's been happy with them. He's put 15,000 kilometers on them. He's got 12 kg all the way around. They are a linear setup. Now, I have gotten one email back from the guy who owns the company, and this is sort of what's kind of pushed me back, because all the reviews say he's really good in communication, but it took him a week to get back with me, and I never responded again. And what kind of has me concerned is I wanted something digressive. Bilstein's digressive, Fortune 500, or Fortune Auto's digressive, but he was trying to suggest that the digressive he makes, he suggests only be used for gravel stages, that it's not actually a street use or race use. And I don't know exactly why he decides that, and I want to do more research on it. But if he can produce a digressive setup and give me a two-way that it would be good for the track and the street and whatnot, and good travel, it is something to consider. The things that kind of hurts really thinking about his stuff is the fact that um, it's a French company. The parts are made in Taiwan, I believe, and I don't know how I would handle warranty stuff or replacement parts or rebuilding and all that. I mean, it might not be an issue. It might cost a little more money. They're a lot cheaper to get into. They're cheaper than the BCs. Though you can actually, I mean, they cost $2,000 to build them all specced out. One nice feature is they have rear camber plates, which none of the other kits have. But this is where I'm sort of at. I'm looking at all my options. I'm going to do more research. I'm going to keep working on my budget, and hopefully, within a couple weeks, I can place an order somewhere and get the stuff started, because it's going to take at least 4 weeks for someone to build anything. And that way I can start getting the car adjusted, put together, and ready to be on the road again. Because, you know, I'm not going to do hardly any engine stuff this year. I've got some parts coming in, but they're probably going to be stored until next winter. But I want to get the car. I want to do a lot of driving this next year. That's the plan. And so I'm going to focus on just getting the suspension the way I want it, getting some autocross and some track time in, making the caster adjustments and whatnot. And the few engine things I'm going to do are mostly for preservation, to deal with, octane and cooling and whatnot. It's all minor stuff just to sort of keep everything in tip-top shape. So I'll put the links below in the description. I'm also going to put a link to the blog, which will have more of this information, and links to various maybe threads and forums and websites. So whatever you guys are interested in, you could research. But if you have any suggestions or questions or reviews of any of this stuff that from your own experience, just post below in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for when we get more stuff figured out and put on the car. So thanks for watching. Take care.